and welcome back to our video series, My Sewing Lessons. You have the first garments under your belt and learned some useful tips, and now you can continue with your introduction to the world of sewing. In this video, we will make some practical trousers. They are very comfy and can be worn any number of ways. You know how to attach an elastic waistband, which we did with the skirt. Now we will show you step by step what to do when putting trouser pieces together. For this model, we are using a Burda B35, a super sewing machine for your first sewing projects. We chose a patterned cotton fabric from C Poly for these trousers. As always, we recommend washing the fabric before starting. You will also need thread in a matching color, elastic, tailor's chalk, sewing machine needles, a set square, a tape measure, straight pins, fabric scissors, thread snips, paper scissors, a tracing wheel, tracing paper, a seam gauge, and an iron. First, find the Burda size that matches your measurements. For these trousers, you will need your waist and hip measurements. And refresh what you learned about taking measurements on page 12. You can also note your measurements in the size chart there. On pattern sheet 1, you will find the pattern piece, which is the template you'll pin to the fabric later. Highlight the outline for your sides with a colored marker. Now cut out the highlighted pattern piece using paper scissors. Now we prepare the fabric for cutting out. Place the fabric flat on the table with the wrong side, which will be the inside of the trousers, facing up. Align the pieces to the fabric selvages, which are the self-finished edges that may look thicker and prevent fraying. To find out how to place a paper pattern piece on the fabric, see the cutting layout in the instructions. Place the paper pattern piece on the fabric with the side with the writing facing up. Align the line on the paper pattern piece that indicates the straight grain on the pattern piece parallel to the selvage. Use a tape measure to check whether the beginning and end of the straight grain line are the same distance away from the selvage and whether it is really parallel. Now you can use a few straight pins to fix it in place all around. You'll need to add seam and hem allowances since the paper pattern piece only includes the finished width of your trousers. Place a set square on the bottom edge of the hem and draw a parallel line on the fabric 3 cm or 1 1/4 inch from the edge. On the other edges, draw a seam allowance of 1.5 cm or 5/8 of an inch. Now draw the second pant leg on the fabric. Remove the pattern piece from the fabric, flip it so that the side with the writing is face down, and pin it in place. Align it parallel to the selvages again. For the best result, trace a straight grain line from the back of your paper pattern piece. Now check the distance to the selvage again using the tape measure. Pin it on the fabric and draw the seam and hem allowances just like you did with the other pant leg. Then use your scissors to cut out both pieces along the outside chalk line. To help you to remember exactly where to stitch later, mark the seam line on the wrong side of the fabric. To do so, place the pattern pieces on top of each other, right sides together. Pin the paper pattern piece in place again. Place a soft piece of fabric on the table and spread out the tracing paper with the coated or colored side facing up. Place the pattern piece on it and roll your tracing wheel around the paper pattern with light pressure. The color of the coating will be pressed into the fabric to exactly mark your seam lines. Mark the notches on the pattern piece as well. Now remove the paper pattern piece from the fabric and pin the 2 layers of fabric together again. You will find detailed instructions in the tracing paper package. And to keep the edges from fraying, use a zigzag stitch to neaten them. Now you can set your sewing machine. To find out how to thread your machine and insert the needle, consult your sewing machine manual. Stitch along the edges and make sure that the needle is always inserted very close to the edge. You can carefully trim the excess fabric at the edges, but avoid cutting into the seam. It's time to start sewing. Begin with the inner leg seams. Fold the pant pieces in half lengthwise so that the edges match and the right sides of the fabric are together. Now you can pin the edges. Make sure that the notches match exactly. Always insert straight pins through both layers of fabric and at a 90-degree angle to the selvage. Now you can simply stitch across the pins without having to remove them. Set a straight stitch on your sewing machine and start with 3 or 4 back stitches to prevent the seam from opening. Now stitch along the marked seam line. Secure the end of the seam with 3 or 4 back stitches. Press the seam allowances apart to make sure that they stay flat. When pressing, the wrong side of the fabric, which is on the inside later, will face up. Separate the seam allowances and press them flat. Now stitch the 2 pant legs together. Turn one of the pant legs so that the nice side is on the outside. Push it into the other pant leg with the right sides of the fabric together. First, pin the inner leg seams together, making sure the seams match. Now pin the curve. Stitch the inside seam and secure the beginning and end of the seam with back stitches. Next, pull the pant leg out. Press the seam allowances of the inside seam apart. To make it look nice, only press the straight section of each seam. Unfold the seam allowance and press it apart until the beginning of the curve. Now you need the elastic for your trousers. Cut a piece to the length indicated for your size. Place the narrow edges together, right sides together. Now stitch at a distance of 1 centimeter or 3/8 of an inch from the edge. Secure the seam beginning and end with back stitches. Now mark the center and the size on the elastic waistband using straight pins. To do so, fold the elastic waistband along the seam and insert a pin into the opposite fold. To ensure that the fabric is evenly distributed on the elastic waistband, unfold the elastic again and place it so that the pin matches the seam. This will create 2 folds and you can mark each one with a straight pin. Next, place the 2 center seams together to create a fold at each side. Mark each of them with a straight pin as well. Now pin the elastic waistband to the trousers. The sides you just marked and the center will meet. Turn the elastic waistband inside out so that the right side is on the outside. Begin at the center back and pin the elastic waistband to the right side of the trousers from the outside. The lower edge of the elastic will be exactly 1.5 centimeters or 5/8 of an inch on the trousers, and the 2 seams must meet. Also pin the marked sides in the center of the elastic to the corresponding straight pins on the trousers. Now stitch the elastic waistband to the trousers. To do so, set a zigzag stitch on your sewing machine. For the best results, begin at the seam, only make a few stitches, and then hold the elastic waistband tightly in front of and behind the needle, stretching it until it is wide enough to reach the first straight pin. Stitch along the edge, making sure you only stretch the elastic and not the trousers. At the end of the seam, make some stitches on top of the seam beginning. Almost finished, the last step is the hem. Fold and press the lower trousers edge along the marked hem line 3 centimeters or 1 1/4 inch to the inside. Pin it all around using straight pins to keep the fabric layers in place when stitching. To make this part easier for you to stitch, remove the extension table and attach a piece of tape to the throat plate 2.5 centimeters or 1 inch away from the needle. Hems are usually stitched from the outside, so the right side. Stitch all along the hem edge and make a few stitches on top of the seam beginning again. And now your first pair of trousers are finished. It wasn't really that difficult to put the pant legs together, was it? If you want to upcycle your trousers, look for the extra tips in this magazine. We hope you had fun and look forward to going through the next lesson with you.